Thanks very much, and thanks very much for the invitation to come along and talk to you. I'm going to actually, I just uploaded my slides to SlideShare because I'm sort of going to ignore them because I didn't quite realise how interesting the other speakers were going to be. So instead of a sort of dreary thing here, I'm going to go back to narrative, as David said. So I'm just going to skip this on very quickly, and we're going to talk about identity, and I'm going to try and make a couple of points for you to take away by telling some stories around it. So I'm going to start with Othello. You know, if you're going to disagree with somebody, you might as well start with someone like Shakespeare, I think, like get stuck in. So Shakespeare, very famous, right? This is from Othello. This was the poster from the Guildford Shakespeare Company version of it in February, which was fantastic, by the way, absolutely fantastic. And if you're not coming to see their version of Henry V at Guildford Castle in July, you're mad, absolutely mad. Get the tickets now while you can. And there's a very famous quote from Othello, which I use in my new book. And I say, did I mention anything about the book? I didn't mean to. Sorry about that, because I absolutely am not going to use the presentation just to make gratuitous sales pitches about the book. That would be absolutely that's Identity is the New Money is the book I'm talking about there. I don't get mixed up with anyone else. Anyway, so I use this quote in my book. See, I can say it like that because it's part of the narrative of the talk. You know, saying something about the book when it's part of, that's not gratuitous. That's perfectly acceptable as part of the, it's like nudity. I said to David, nudity, I'm perfectly prepared to do nudity as part of the presentation, but only when it's part of the narrative, not if it's sort of gratuitous kind of thing. So I assure you it's absolutely part of the narrative. Please don't panic or call the authorities at any point. So Shakespeare said, "He that steals filches from me my good name, robs me of that which not enriches him and makes me poor indeed." And he's completely wrong. He's absolutely wrong. Filching from people from their good name does enrich you very greatly. If it didn't, we wouldn't be in a situation where about 2/3 of all fraud in the UK right now is identity fraud. If it didn't enrich you, nobody would do it. I mean, you would do it for the purposes of mischief, obviously. It's funny logging in as the Daily Telegraph and posting abuse about the Chancellor of the Exchequer under somebody else's name. Who hasn't done that? You've got to have a hobby, that's my point. But Shakespeare was wrong about this. We have a situation where, oh, actually, sorry, I want to make another point before I move on from that. Sorry, sorry, I'm not using these buttons terribly. There's only 2 of them, and I'm getting them mixed up already. Right, let's try going forward again. Good, okay. So this is my obligatory slide about the stone currency of the island of Yap. It's an EU directive, ladies and gentlemen. You're not allowed to make a presentation about the future of money unless you include a slide about the stone currency of the island of Yap. So I wanted to sort of get that out of the way at the earliest opportunity. I'm sure you're all extremely familiar with the story, Milton Friedman, etc. So basically, there was no precious metals, so they used stones. The stones come from another island. The stones are gigantic, so you can't move them, right? So here's the chief's house, and here's his stones outside the house. So if the chief needs to spend some of that money, like say he's got a daughter getting married, needs to pay a dowry. I apologise for the sexist example. I'm using real anthropological instances here. So so if the chief, his daughter's getting married, he has to pay a dowry. It would be too much hassle to actually move one of those stones from my house to David's house, so we don't bother. We just tell everybody, actually that stone's David's stone. Everything works fine, right? And the twist on the story is when they were bringing these stones back from the other island, occasionally they would sink. The Pacific's quite deep at that point. It's about 5 miles down. So these stones are 5 miles down at the bottom of the Pacific. It doesn't matter. We can't see the stones. Who cares? As long as we all agree it's my stone and I give it to David and now it's David's stone, the whole thing's work. Well, that's Bitcoin for you, so that's sorted. So let's move on to that. So, but the point is, it depends on remembering who the stones belong to. Hence my quote from Kocherlakota from the Federal Reserve, which is a fabulously important quote. It says, "Money is technologically equivalent to a primitive form of memory," right? It's a primitive form of memory. And you can see where the direction of travel here is going, because if we have a better kind of memory, we don't need the intermediary. That's where we're going. You can second guess me on this one. So this takes us to what Jaron Lanier last year called, what I would call digital identities, what he calls economic avatars. So he says when we're talking about the future of money, we're not really talking about interactions between people, we're talking about interactions between economic avatars. That's different. So if I give you £1, that's an interaction between people. If I go into Waitrose and use my credit card, that's not an interaction between people, that's an interaction between economic avatars. That's an interaction between sort of my virtual me that has the bank account and the virtual Waitrose, which is off in the cloud somewhere, right? It's not a transaction. And so the question is, looking at this, how can we look at that and see where we're going forward from here, right? Because until quite recently, if you'd have been discussing this kind of thing, if I'd have been discussing this kind of thing, I guess we probably would have thought, well, I don't know, cards probably are where it's all going, you know, and maybe phones and whatever. But my argument is it's a more profound shift than that. I want to illustrate the point with a slight tangential. This came up at dinner last night, actually. We were talking at dinner last night, and I was thinking it would be funny. In fact, we should do it as a thing. If this was wired money 1636, so if we were all gathered here, I mean literally here, right now, if we were gathered here for wired money in 1636, the thing that David would be excited about would not be the internet, but Holland, right? Because the 17th century equivalent of the new space, where all this incredible new thinking was taking place, was actually Holland. Holland was the home of the free thinkers, Erasmus, and Holland was where all the new ideas about, you know, the personhood and law were coming from. We were discussing the extent to which the early formulation of the United States from the founding of Manhattan actually hinges on the fact it was a Dutch colony and not an English one. That ingrains certain things. So we'd all be sitting here, and this crazy new space where all these new ideas coming from wouldn't be the internet, it would be Holland. We'd all be looking at, well, wow, crazy place. What's going on in Holland at the moment? Well, there's two amazing things going on in Holland right now. So one is people have discovered that you can make these tulip bulbs, and they grow into these really pretty, and they're a fantastic investment. And they're going up like every week, like you wouldn't even believe it. Tulip coin, as I've chosen to call them. Tulip coin is going up every week. It's absolutely fantastic. We must pile into tulip. And you know what? It's great because actually the tulips are useful because you plant them and they grow into beautiful flowers and that kind of. So this is a fantastic thing. They've also invented this thing called a central bank. It's hilarious. So basically you give them money and they give you pieces of paper, and then when you want to pay merchants, you pay them with the pieces of paper. This is ridiculous. This is never going to catch on. Never. So in 1636, we'd all have been getting behind tulips and missing the institutional changes which underlie these things. My point is, it's the institutional changes that shape the future of finance. And so we have to look at these technological changes, and we have to think what they mean in institutional changes. Now, Brett, oh, actually, sorry, I'll make another point about that. I'll make another point about cards. Brett this morning was talking, he made a very funny point, which is a very well-made point, about signatures and cards and card fraud. And I just want to use that to illustrate one little point I'm going to make about these economic avatars. So I was in Las Vegas, this is a true story, I was in Las Vegas a few weeks ago, and I went to buy, Lee's bored because I've told him this story before, but I went to Starbucks to buy a cup of coffee. And this is true, this is in Luxor Casino in Las Vegas. I go to get a cup of coffee, Starbucks, right? And I take out my Simple card, because I'm connected to the financial future. I've got a Simple account, who hasn't? So I take out my Simple card to $3 cup of coffee. And the woman there says, you have to have picture ID to buy a cup of coffee. Go, picture ID. I'm not making this up. Picture ID to buy a cup of coffee. They have half the world's card volume, sorry, a quarter of the world's card volume, half the world's card fraud. The system is so broken, you have to produce picture ID to get a cup, which of course I didn't have, right? So I said to her, I don't come from North Korea or France. I have no tradition of walking down the street with some sort of identity documentation. But how would I have picture ID? That doesn't make. She goes, you can't have the cup of coffee unless you have picture ID. So I'm rummaging around in my bag to see if I can find anything that might have picture ID on it. And I find the expired building pass for our office in New York. So I've got a building pass for our office in New York, which is expired, which does have my picture on it. that's all, right? It's one of these contactless things. You tap it to get into the office. It expired months ago. I can't be asked to go and get the new one, so I just use the old one. No one cares, right? So I show her my expired building pass from, and great, I can have the cup of coffee. And that's what we call, in the trade, that's what we call security theatre, right? So that's a situation where everybody is an actor in a play about security, but there's no actual security taking place. We're all acting out our parts, but there's no actual security. So you don't understand how broken the current system is, and it irritates me when I come to current. Why are you going on about mobile payments and stuff like that? Because cards work fine. They don't. They don't work fine. They superficially work fine because the costs are diffuse and offloaded. Half of all the card fraud in the world is in the United States. Why does nobody, if you look at the official statistics in the US, it will say, oh, card fraud is whatever it is, I don't know, 7 basis points or something. Because the entire cost of that has been offloaded onto other people. It's the merchants that are paying X billion pounds a year, PCI, DSS, and fraud losses and whatever. So the system is broken. And there has to be some kind of institutional change, is my point. So I just want to back up what Brett said earlier on. So what do I think that change is going to be? I think it's going to be this. So I said to somebody, I was giving a talk the other day, and I said, you shouldn't listen to technologists. I imagine it's one of the wired, I'm sure you have this engraved on things in various places. But everybody knows technologists, like me, overestimate the pace of change, but we underestimate the impact. And the reason for that is because when we see a technology that works better for something, we automatically assume that everybody will instantly replace the old technology and use the new one. And, oh God, I've gone blank on his name. Who's the historian that wrote the book about technology? David, The Shock of the New. David, I apologise to him. I've gone blank on his name. But there's a very good book about the history of technology diffusion called The Shock of the New, which has one of my favourite statistics of all time in it, by the way, which has nothing to do with finance or money or whatever. But my favourite statistics of all time, which is that when Hitler invaded Russia, when he launched his attack on Moscow, he had more horses than Napoleon did when he attacked it. He's making the Hughes, that's right. So he was making the point, like, just how long it takes technology to diffuse. Hitler had more horses for his invasion than Napoleon did. It's got nothing to do with this, but it's an interesting statistic. So what was I talking about? I've sort of forgotten about on this bit. Where were we? Oh, right, so institution. Right, so if you want the big picture stuff, you shouldn't really ask technologists. You should ask people who think about big picture stuff. And my favourite in this instance are social anthropologists. I think they're the right kind of people. They have the right kind of balance. They help technologists like me understand the impact of the technological change, which is important. And one of my very favourite is a guy called Jack Weatherford. Jack Weatherford wrote a very good book on the history of money. And he didn't say this in the book, he said this quite separately. But Jack said, the electronic money world, he's talking about the future, looks more like the Neolithic world economy before the invention of money than it looks like the market as we've known it for the last few hundred years. And what Jack meant by that was, if you have a world in which you don't have that primitive version of memory, you have a more sophisticated memory. If you can remember whose stones belong to who completely, I mean, you can see why that doesn't scale in the Neolithic. I mean, that's fine when you're a clan, right? But that doesn't scale much beyond that because you can't remember. So you need intermediaries and institutions to manage. Banks predate money by some 2,500 years. When you move out of your Neolithic clan, you need... But if you can remember everything, then the whole economy is like a Neolithic clan. And because you can remember the system of kind of mutual cross-obligations which make society function, you don't need the intermediary anymore. That's what Jack meant by that. And I know, and you'll think that sounds implausible, like how could, but I would argue that that's where the combination of social networks and mobile phones are taking us into a world where everybody knows everybody else. And I'll give you one story just to illustrate that point. So everybody here has been to Mobile World Congress, right? Does it ring any bells at all to anybody in the room? Help me out, guys. It's the afternoon. Thank you. Somebody has been to Mobile World Congress. It's in Barcelona. It's a horrible zoo, 75,000 people. We have no choice but to go. So a friend of mine was at Mobile World Congress this year, and he got back to his hotel. I know, I'm running over, but it's a good story. Just give me the 2 minutes, okay? He gets back to his hotel, 2 o'clock in the morning. My friend was a speaker at the event, and so he gets back to his hotel, 2 o'clock in the morning, and there's a guy in the lobby, says, "Oh, I recognize you, Mr. Smith. You were a speaker at the..." He goes, "Yeah, I was." He goes, "Listen, can you give me a hand?" He said, "The thing is, we went down into the town for a few drinks, and I got talking to this very attractive woman, not to put too fine a point on it, and she asked me back to her place for a few drinks, and I went. And I should say, just to go to John's point earlier on, there is a relationship between the presence of women on trading floors and risk-taking by men. I didn't want to bring that point up. I didn't want to be insensitive. But really, you should ban men from trading floors if you want this. Anyway, so so he went back for. So he said, I went for a few drinks, and he said, the next thing I remember, I woke up in the alleyway outside this building, and my wallet and my passport and all my money have gone. I've just got the clothes I'm standing up in. He said, I can't call my wife about this, obviously. So he said, could you lend me a couple of €100 so I could get a train ticket back to a major international capital city that you can get the train from Barcelona to? I'm sworn by the Brotherhood not to reveal where he was going. So my friend said, I mean, the guy looked kind of plausible. It flattered him. So my friend said, okay, what's your LinkedIn profile? So the guy gave me his name. My friend took out his mobile phone, looked him up on LinkedIn. Sure enough, there was his picture. And they had a lot of mutual connections. Oh, right. Oh, so you know so-and-so at a leading international telecommunications company. I goes, oh, right. So my friend says, okay, I'll give you the €200. So the guy took the €200 and caught the train home. And when he got home, he reported his wallet as lost on the train, and everything was fine, right? And a couple of days later, my friend got the €200 back by PayPal, and everything was okay. My point is, that's the Neolithic clan, right? So if the guy who was stuck in Barcelona in the middle of the night with no money, and if he'd have been able to show my friend a passport, so what? If he'd still got his Portuguese fishing license in his back pocket, who cares? Suppose he could show you a Barclays checkbook or something. None of this would matter. The social capital, the memory, is more important. And that's what the future society will function on. So my point is, oh, I haven't got time for it. But if you don't believe that you can run a country without cash, I've included a little case study about a country that did just that, which was Ireland in the 1970s. Oh, and did I mention the book? Sorry about that. Thank you very much.
It's all right, Dave. All my questions to you I asked on SlideShare. Thank you very much.
Cheers.